For the last 3 weeks, I messaged to at least 450 people, and I talked to different people from different countries, for example, China, United States, India, Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, and so on. So based on that, I'm going to also suggest some applications which you can use for doing so as well. And they're absolutely free. You don't need to even spend a dime for those applications. And also, I'm going to share my experience during this process, which I think you haven't heard them before, and they're going to help you a lot as well. So first of all, let's talk about the benefits of doing so based on my own experience and based on some data that I have. For example, if you look at this, you can see that in this period, which is about 365 days, I learned 143 words. But in the last 28 days, I learned this amount of word, 193. And all of that is because of this speaking practices. And in my opinion, the reason for that is that because it's a very motivating process, because it's like a kind of positive competition between you and the person that you are practicing with. And because of that competition, you try to learn more words, you try to spend more time on speaking English and trying to improve your English, because sometimes as I've told you, it's a kind of positive competition. You want to be better than that person that you are practicing with. For example, if that person uses a word that you don't know, you want to learn that word, and possibly you want to make progress so that you can be better than that person. As I've told you, it's a kind of positive competition, not a negative form of competition. And in my opinion, that gives you a lot of motivation for doing so. So first of all, let's talk about some advices, or let's say some suggestions about doing this process, which in my opinion, it's very important, because if you don't apply these things, chances are you're not going to have beneficial conversations and beneficial practices for language learning process. The first thing is that, in my opinion, it's better not to practice with your compatriot. I mean, the person who lives in your own country, or has the native language that you have, who speaks in your native language. So for example, my native language is Persian, and if I want to talk to my compatriots and practice speaking English, so for example, chances are if we face some challenges, we are going to follow the easiest path, which is speaking Persian. And that is not a good thing, because we are there to improve our English, not to improve our Persian. But for example, suppose that when I speak to a person who is Chinese, because the native language of that person is Chinese and my native language is Persian, I don't understand Chinese, and that person doesn't understand Persian either. So as you can see, we should do our best. We should try whatever it takes. We should do our best to convey what you want to convey in English, and that is going to be very beneficial, because it is going to help us to improve our English, which is our main goal. But the other thing is language exchange. What do I mean by language exchange? For example, my native language is Persian, and suppose that the native language of another person is English. So if you want to exchange these languages, it means that I'm going to teach that person some stuff in Persian, and that person is going to teach me some stuff in English. So this is called language exchange. And there are some pros and cons regarding to this topic. For example, in my opinion, one of the most important cons of this is that you are actually practicing your target language. I mean, for example, in this case, I'm practicing English only 50% of that time. And the other 50% of that time is not optimal, and I'm practicing my own native language, which is Persian. So this is one of the most important cons. And also the other one is that, for example, for some languages which you can see the demand is high, for example, like English or Arabic, those native speakers are busy, and chances are you can't find native speakers easily, in my opinion. But the pros are very obvious. For example, when you're talking to a person whose native language is not English, that person only knows a subset of, for example, words in that language, and I myself know a subset of words in that language as well. So we are not going to use some kind of advanced words and some kind of words that are not common. So, but when you're talking to a person whose native language is English, he knows a lot of stuff in his language. So chances are he's going to use a lot of words and phrases that you don't know, and you can learn from that person. And also, when you have some questions, you can ask that native speaker, and you can guarantee that those answers will be correct. But for example, if you have some questions and you ask your friend, which his native language is not English, chances are he doesn't know the answer of that question as well. And the other thing is that you should even look at those messages that you send to other people as a kind of material for language learning. For example, I remember that when I was sending a message to one of my Chinese friends, I wanted to say something which I didn't know I should use the word compatriot for saying that. I wanted to say, oh, for example, your compatriot said that you can use this application as well. Or for example, the other day when he sent me a message and he used two phrases that I didn't know the meaning of those phrases in English. So I checked those phrases in the dictionary and I added them to my flashcard system. So the thing that I want to mention is that you should look at those messages as a kind of material as well for learning English and for whatever language you're learning as well. But now let's talk about the talk sessions, or let's say those conversations that you're going to have with those people that you are practicing speaking. So as far as I remember, we talked about foods. We always talked about foods in the first session with those people, the foods of our countries. And for the other sessions, we try to pre-plan, which in my opinion, it's a very important thing, because when you don't pre-plan and when you enter a room spontaneously and without any preparation, chances are you're going to use some simple words and some simple stuff in order to convey what you want to convey. For example, suppose that person asks me, okay, what is the ingredient of this food? So maybe I don't know what is the equivalent of that ingredient in English. So probably I'm going to search that word in my own native language, Persian, and I'm going to show that person the picture of that ingredient and he will understand that, and that's it. You're not going to learn anything. But if you pre-plan for that topic, if you pre-plan the topic of that session, all of us are going to learn some stuff before even entering that room, and we are going to, for example, learn the equivalent of that ingredient in English and these sorts of things. So in my opinion, it's very important to pre-plan the topic of that session. And for doing so, I suggest using Google Gemini, Bing, and ChatGPT for doing so. But remember that when I say using these things, Google Gemini, Bing, and ChatGPT, it's very simple. For example, what I do is, I type, translate the following text in English, and I would type a text in Persian, and I ask Google Gemini, for example, to translate that into English. That's it. And I really suggest you to double check that thing as well. For example, when Google Gemini says something and says, okay, this is the translation, I'm going to double check, check that thing again on, for example, Google or dictionaries in order to make sure that those things are natural and correct in English. But here is a question, and that question is, what about topics? Because, for example, in the first session, you are going to talk about, for example, the foods of your countries. But what about the other sessions? Because, for example, suppose that I'm having a conversation with a friend every other day, and we want to continue this for, 2 years, for the next 2 years. So in that case, we are going to have at least 300 sessions. So what about topics? What we are going to talk about in those conversations? So because after some sessions, you're going to run out of ideas of what to talk about. You don't have any topic to talk about. So in this case, one of my suggestions is using a website called ESL Discussion, which you can, if you search ESL Discussion website on Google, you can find this website. Then you can see that it has some different topics. You can click on them, and on any topic, it has some questions that you can use for speaking. And also, you can use TOEFL or IELTS speaking prompts as well. And also, you can use for example, such websites such as Google Gemini, Bing, or ChatGPT, or these kinds of things, and ask them some speaking prompts for speaking that language that you want to practice with that person. Okay, now before talking about those applications, one of the most important thing that I really suggest you to do is tracking your progress. Because, for example, I myself try to track my progress using Obsidian Note Taking app, which is free. And in that Obsidian Note Taking app, there is a plugin called Spaced Repetition, which I use for adding flashcards. And one of the cool things about tracking your progress, for example, when I look at the number of words which I added in the last 28 days, and when I compare it to that, for example, 365 period, and when I compare it to that, it shows my progress, and that is, in my opinion, that is the beauty of tracking your progress, because it's a cool thing, and you become very motivated of seeing your progress. And in my opinion, that's a very good thing. So I really suggest you to track your progress as well, for example, using these applications. But now let's talk about the applications, which a lot of people want to know about those applications. But as I've told you, using these applications without considering those stuff, which I mentioned before, is, in my opinion, useless, because you need to consider those stuff as well. But anyway, I use a lot of applications, and I want to mention 2 applications which I found useful. And let's start with the second one, which is high local. So what is high local? High local is actually a kind of language learning platform which when you enter that application, you can see there are different tables, there are different rooms, there are different tables called tables, and you can see the topic of that table, and also you can see the level of that table, which unfortunately a lot of times it is not correct, because I myself have experienced this a lot, that for example I see that the level of a table is set to be advanced, but when you enter that table you can see that it is very basic, and it is not, it was supposed to be advanced, but it is not. It was not. So yeah, there are some problems like this as well. But anyway, you can find the topic and level of that table. And if you, for example, tap on that table, you can see some other information. For example, what people from what countries are there are inside that table, and these sorts of things. And for example, you can click on that or tap on that lesson button, and then you can enter that table, and you can just listen to what they're talking about, or you can, for example, ask the host to speak as well in that table. But now let's talk about the pros and cons of high local. First of all, let's talk about the pros of high local. One of the most important pros of high local app is that you can enter that table, you can enter that application and find a table to practice speaking English or practice listening whenever you want. It doesn't matter. You don't need any pre-planning. You don't need to ask anyone, oh, please come on, let's, for example, have a conversation together at this time or these kinds of things. No, you don't need to. You can enter that table whenever you want, and whenever you want, you can go there and start practicing speaking. But so this is one of the most important pros of this application. But what about cons? There are a lot of cons about high local. One of them is, as I've mentioned, for example, when you enter a room, it is said that the level of that table is advanced. But when you enter that, you can see that sometimes I found this, I faced this challenge a lot, and I found this thing very common. Yeah, it is said that the level is advanced, but when you go there, you can see that it is not advanced and it is basic. And also, for example, you can see that the topic is set to be something, but when you enter that table, you see that the topic is another thing. Or sometimes you see some vague topics, and you don't know what is going to happen in this table. As I've told you, one of the things that I mentioned in the first part is the importance of predefining a topic, because that is going to help you a lot for learning process and for learning words and these kinds of things. But as a matter of fact, this is not going to happen in high local because there isn't any predefined topic. And also, sometimes you enter a room and you see that there are some people who are talking about political things and these kinds of things, which I don't like at all. But anyway, in my opinion, high local has a lot of disadvantages as well, but it has some advantages as well. But in my opinion, the cons are, the number of cons are far higher, are far more than the number of pros in that application, in my opinion. But now let's talk about the other application, which is called a Speaky app. Yeah, I agree that there are a lot of challenges in a Speaky app as well, which I'm going to talk about how you can handle them. But in my opinion, when I want to compare that with high local, I think Speaky app is far more better and far more useful than the high local, at least in my opinion. First of all, when you enter the Speaky app, it doesn't have any kind of table that you can enter and listen to other people or start speaking. It doesn't have anything like that. But there are a lot of people in a Speaky app which you can filter them based on some options, based on some criteria, and based on that you can message to those people and, for example, ask them to have a conversation, I don't know, on Google Meet, Skype, or these sorts of things. So for example, when you go to Speaky app, it has some filters. You can filter those people based on their English level. You can sort those people based on their country, based on their gender, and based on their age. I myself usually use the level and gender. For example, I myself only message to the people whose English level was C1 or B2 or C2 and these kinds of things. And also, I usually check the tick of male in the gender section because I'm not there for dating. And one of the challenges that you face in a Speaky app is that, unfortunately, a lot of people are there because of dating and not because of language learning, unfortunately. And this is something that causes a lot of problems. For example, I messaged to at least 450 people, and among those people, I can say that 90% of the people are not going to answer because they are there because of maybe dating and not language learning. And some of them answer, and you will see some problems. For example, they say, oh, I want to just chat in this app and I don't want to have any conversation on Skype or Google Meet. But the thing is that I'm here for practicing speaking. I'm not here for practicing writing. Chatting with that person is a kind of writing, but not a speaking practice. Anyway, you find a lot of problems like these as well. But anyway, at the end, you're going to find some people that you can talk to those people. And that is very good, in my opinion, because, for example, when you go to high local, for example, suppose that there are 10 people in that table. So, for example, if you spend 10 minutes in that application, ideally, you're going to speak 10% of the time. Why I say ideally? Because you will find some people who are talkative and they don't let others to speak at all. So this is one bad thing about high local. But when you find a person that you are going to, for example, pre-plan and you are going to schedule, for example, a meeting, a conversation with that person on, for example, Skype or Google Meet, you are going to talk with that person. At least you are going to talk 50% of the time, and that is a cool thing about talking to a person instead of going to a table in high local. And also you can pre-plan for the topic of that discussion, and that is a good thing. And you can learn a lot more in those sessions rather than those tables that you can find on high local app. And also sometimes I try to add for example, filter for the country as well. For example, based on my experience, now I have 4 Chinese friends, and based on that, I can say that I found Chinese people one of the most friendly people in that application. For example, as I've told you, I messaged to a lot of people, and a lot of them, at least 90% of those people don't answer because, I don't know, maybe they're there for dating and not language learning. But among those people, I found Chinese people one of the most friendly people. So that's why sometimes I only choose the people from China, and I message them and I ask them whether they want to practice speaking English with each other or not. But for example, other than that, I don't care about the age of that person. I don't care whether the age of that person is 20, 80, 60, or 100. I don't care, because I want to just practice speaking English with that person. I don't care about the age of that person. It doesn't really matter. I want to just practice, and for practicing, you can practice with the person who's 20. You can practice with the person who's 80, and you can practice with the person who's 100. It doesn't really matter. By the way, if you found this video useful, I would really appreciate it if you tap the like button, because it is going to help this video with the YouTube algorithm, and it is going to suggest this video to a lot more people. And thank you for watching this video. I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much, and goodbye.